delicious.
Rolling on all fronts. Hey, there's beer in front of us. I don't know if they're the beers in frame, but that doesn't really matter because we'll show you as we go along when we talk about today's subject, which is another reason why you can't trust homebrew recipes.
We're gonna be doing a side-by-side comparison of different brown malts.
That's right. These are 3 brown malt style beers, or brown style beers, brewed with the exact same recipe, on the exact same system, fermented in the exact same way. The only difference is we changed the brown malt that we used in them, and visually I can tell a huge difference right off the bat.
That's actually pretty impressive. Yeah, all 3 of these beers have different colors.
Yeah. Let's start with let's go left to right. Actually, let's switch this around. Let's go left to right.
Oh, we're gonna do lightest to darkest.
The reason I'm saying, I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is the lightest beer in the brown malt beers that we made, and this is the darkest. So we're that side by side. That is pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, we're like talking the difference between like an American amber ale color and like straight up porter. Like that's impressive.
So we will link the recipe below, but just to give you a basic breakdown, look at the little sheet above our face that shows what malts we used. Yeah, so let's start with the Baird's one. Baird's is actually the brown malt that we use here for the only reason that it's the brown malt that I grew up using, and I really like it. It's got a nice nutty kind of complexity to it that reminds me of like a spring brown ale.
Spring brown ale.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
In my recollection.
Let's put this to the test then.
Very much like I remember it. It is kind of nutty. It's got a little brightness to it, maybe like a little...
Yeah, it's like peanuts.
Yeah, peanuts, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, take this with a grain of salt because my nose is semi-functional at this time, so you can probably tell.
This is a really, really tasty beer, to be honest. But yeah, it does have that brightness. It reminds me of, I don't know, almost like a wood, like a tree cedar or something like that. Like it's got a little bit of that tannic to kind of...
I was gonna say, speaking of, or like kind of the flavor is like a walnut, like a black walnut.
There we go.
Before you roast them, they kind of have that tannic characteristic to them.
But other than that, it's just got a really beautiful, nutty kind of flavor to it and nose.
Nutty, delicate, really.
Yeah. Oh, Tim is gonna be in this one because he brewed all these.
Sit your face down.
This has got to be The Simpsons.
Baird's, Thomas Fawcett, Simpsons. Super awkward cut.
Yeah. I'm gonna get one of those this spring.
Oh.
Oh.
Someone's getting the snip.
Yeah.
Anyways, so excuse the super awkward intermission there, but now we're joined by Tim. He's one of our brewers here at Genus, and you've probably seen him in maybe this video. If you click on that iCard, one involving sours and or another sour. Those are the 2 videos he's been in previously, but he's the one that brewed all 3 of these, and so he said it'd probably be a good idea to taste it with him. Especially
since he wandered in out of the primordial soup out there.
Yeah, that didn't make any sense. Anyways, we're tasting the Baird's right now. So obviously we're going light to dark, and we already showed them how starkly different these colors are. But you were able to pick that up because you're the one that brewed them and you saw them going into the fermenter. You noticed how different they were.
Yeah, it was incredible for being the same recipe for all 3 beers to come out just that different straight from the chiller after making them.
Yep.
It was awesome.
So yeah, actually now that it's warmed up a little bit, I'm getting a little bit more fruity notes on it than I did when we first tasted it cold off the taps. But I still think the dominant flavors are a nuttiness with a little bit of kind of a green component to it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I'm tasting it fresh, cold, so I don't have quite as much fruitiness. I can taste a little bit under there, but it's I mean, I would honestly call this a nut brown.
Yeah.
Like I would say it's style definition of a nut brown.
Surprisingly, it does not really dominate the beer either, at least not like our chocolate malt video.
Yeah.
Where like those were like intensity of flavor there with those guys.
All right, so let's jump into the second one, which is the Thomas Fawcett one. And obviously, this is the middle of our 3 color ranges, and that's all I have to say.
Out of the 3, This, I think, has the most gorgeous head on it, just appearances-wise. It's got a little bit more creaminess going on the top than the other two did, a little less rocky than the Baird's.
That has nothing to do with us throwing these kegs at 35 PSI last night and just randomly carbonating them to whatever we could do today.
I do feel like it does have something to do with the sweetness factor, because there is a little bit of extra sweetness, and all these finish at the same final gravity, I'm pretty sure, right?
They were all about 1 point off of each other.
So, negligible difference.
This was actually finished the lowest out of them all.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. And while brewing it, looking at the grains too, the Thomas Fawcett definitely had a fattier grain, fatter, I guess I should say, grain to it.
So to compare this, I would actually say the aroma is less intense than with the Baird's.
Absolutely, yeah. So the nuttiness in the Baird's comes through right in the aroma and then follows through in the taste. This one's more of a subdued aroma, but on the taste, I get like really a dominant, almost green coffee kind of flavor.
Yeah.
Definitely green coffee. There's some good brown fruitiness, and I don't know how other to describe that besides like English brown beers that have that nice English fruity character.
Something you might maybe expect from like a dark crystal malt kind of a thing.
Yeah, a little bit of crystalline-esque quality. Yeah, it leads into dark fruit really well. I would say this is distinctly fruitier than the first one.
Yeah. On that note, too, which is weird that you actually mentioned this is the lowest finishing gravity beer, is that I feel like from the first one, this actually has a little bit more sweetness and a little more body to accompany the beer as well, which is kind of contradictory.
More full, right?
Yeah, it tastes more full, exactly.
Where I would say the Baird's is a perfect kind of spring brown. This one tastes like a nice going into fall brown. You're used to the hot summer weather, but all of a sudden it starts to turn a little bit chilly. You get some nice autumn leaves swinging by, and you're like, yeah, this is what I want.
The time to wear a vest, where it's winter on your chest and summer on your arms.
That's right, there we go. All right, let's dive into the third one. The third one is from Simpsons, and Simpsons is one, literally I just brought in this bag of brown malt because I was like, hey, we already made two, we're planning on making 2 other brown malt ones. Why not bring a third brown malt in to make Logan happy, because he loves it when I have a lot of extra malts to play with. Inventory is not an issue here at all.
This one I'm not getting any on the nose. Like, it's like completely neutral, which is weird.
This one tastes more in that roasted malt world.
Yeah. I would say that the nose is far more subdued, but when you can get into it, it might just be the height of the glass, not being able to properly put your schnoz in the glass for a good sniff. When you get in there, it definitely has a lot more like coffee roast on the nose. Much more subdued than the other two, but...
I would say this one gets into that like true roast kind of character, like what I would expect from a roast malt.
Yeah, this one I'm getting a lot more like cocoa bean from...
Yeah. But you still get that nuttiness. I would say that, you know, that green kind of nuttiness, you know, like it's got, I would say the first one and the last one have kind of, I can only describe it as green, like that, it tastes like wood, like cedar, like you said, walnut skins, kind of like that.
Yeah. Got some of that. But no, I just keep coming back to like, if you've ever chewed cocoa nibs.
Yeah.
Like that's what I get off of this. Like if you've eaten a straight cocoa nib, that's kind of what I get from this one, which is...
This would actually be a really interesting substitute for like a pale chocolate.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. I feel like this would be more along that pale chocolate malt. This is definitely not what I expect from a brown malt. It doesn't have quite that drying effect that I think of as brown malts, which is kind of with the Baird's, the first one.
Yeah.
That's kind of usually what I think of. But yeah, that's... It's very interesting.
That'd be a fun thing to play with, though. Like if you're doing an amber or just trying to get that pop of color, like we mentioned in our roasted malts video, just using this Simpsons brown malt for that pop of color instead of a pale chocolate, I could see that going pretty well.
I'd say the Simpsons is actually probably the most complex out of them all, though.
Yeah.
It's while the flavor isn't quite what I expect, it's really complex. It's definitely that of like a complex pale chocolate malt. You still have... You've got kind of both flavors of the first two with a little bit of that extra deep roast in there. So
I get almost a licoricey kind of quality too, like a
little anise.
Yeah, just a touch, kind of finishing out there.
It's almost bridging into brown porter.
Yeah,
and I would say, I mean, using a high proportion of this with just a touch more roasted malt would give you a beautiful, beautiful brown porter. Definitely. Give you a lot more complexity than just using a little bit of, say, black patent or something like that.
Yeah, it's a really delightful beer, actually. All these are really delicious beers. I would say that for my own palate and what I like from a brown malt, I still prefer the Baird's. Baird's is my go-to. It tastes like brown to me, and that could just be personal bias because it's what I've used for forever. But my favorite malt flavor-wise, or like maybe the most interesting malt to use, might be the Simpsons malt.
Yeah. I think the Simpsons, could really easily be subbed into a lot of your dark beer recipes, and I mean maybe even swap it out for like a chocolate malt if you want to play around. I mean, I think color-wise, it's not too much dark or less dark than a chocolate malt. If you watched a roasted video, this is probably 100 Lovabond less than a chocolate malt, but still has that similar flavor profile.
Yeah. I think to wrap up in general, if you were to try to make the same beer with this brown malt versus this brown malt, you definitely have to use a lot less of this brown malt and kind of play with different middle flavors to get the same effect as this, which goes to show you the point of us doing all these side-by-sides, which is not only to tell you that they're, let you explore the huge differences in malts, but just to tell you that if you look at a recipe, that recipe is not necessarily going to be the same depending on where you shop and what ingredients you have on hand.
I would also throw into that in the brewing world, English tend to make fun of Americans for not being able to make a proper brown beer. It's kind of a thing that's out there. Only the Brits can make good brown beer, and this might be actually a big reason why, is they're using different malts for it. Maybe the same brown malt, but obviously produces some different beers.
So before we wrap everything up and give you kind of some final conclusions on all this, let's go ahead and tell you which brown malts we think would be used in which beers and what percentage they think we should be using those in.
To start off with these, there's 30% of brown malt in each of these beers. Halcyon for the base malt on it.
Delicious base malt.
Delicious base malt, which we'll be doing some side-by-sides with that if you want to see how it stacks up to Golden Promise and Maris Otter and Maris Otter and Maris Otter. And Maris Otter.
And other Golden Promise.
And other Golden Promise. Maybe Pearl? Pearl.
I don't buy too many malts.
Bottom line is that 30% is a pretty high amount of brown malt in any grain bill. So
I think it works beautifully in this beer specifically.
It does.
I think it works well in all these beers, but I think that's the perfect percentage for this Baird's brown malt. I think you get a huge amount of nuttiness off of that, and I would say this could be perfect at that 30% for just a true spring brown. But if you used it in a lower percentage, I could see that being used to kind of round out some base in an amber, maybe at 10%, or in a porter, maybe at 10 to 15%.
No. Add a little bit of extra depth, a tiny bit of nuttiness to your porters, or if you're trying to go for those big, robust porter or huge roasty stouts.
I can even see that 10 to 15% working pretty well in something like an ESB.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Especially with the proper base malt. That could be a huge, really nice 2-malt ESB, honestly, with just like 10 to 15% of this brown malt, and then a proper Maris Otter or a proper like the Halcyon. Let's move on to that Thomas Fawcett, because this one's definitely sweeter and definitely good for a different range of beers. The Thomas Fawcett, I see like being a really good complex component to like an American amber ale, where you can get that same kind of brown quality, but that sweetness will carry through without getting the full sweetness of using too much crystal malt.
Definitely has that acidity that I expect in an American amber ale. So yeah, I think same thing. Again, though, lowering that percentage, definitely, maybe, I probably wouldn't go much more than 10%. With some other malts in there as well.
Definitely balance it with some other malts for sure.
Otherwise, I can actually see this being used in other, actually, like, I want to say some like German style lagers as well. Something like a Doppelbock. Actually, this wouldn't be end of the world in.
Some dark lagers, some German. Yeah, definitely not German light lagers, but that
not light lagers.
that Doppelbock range, and I also see it kind of blending into maybe even like an English style IPA if you don't want to get the huge sweetness from a crystal malt again, but you want some more sweetness than English style IPA used at maybe a smaller percentage, 5 to 10%. This malt could be a pretty good player too.
I would say around the same color level, you could replace any crystal malt with this Thomas Fawcett Brown, and it would be very appropriate and very delicious.
And add more complexity too. That's a good way to go. So try that out. If you have access to this Thomas Fawcett Brown malt, I believe the level. I'll post a Lovabond in front of my face. I'm not going to make up numbers because I'm not sure. But I'll post a Lovabond in front of my face, and then you guys can substitute it.
I'm pretty sure it's 1600.
1600.
That sounds right.
Yeah,
that sounds right.
It's definitely 1600. So now let's just move on to the last one, which is the Simpsons, the darkest of all the brown malts.
Which we should point out, the Lovabond for Simpsons.
As in the same level bond as that pale chocolate. The Simpsons actually does come in at 165 to 225.
Totally didn't just look that up.
Nope.
Not at all.
Knew it the whole time. Just in the back of my mind. But the point of this wasn't to say that these are the same malts. The point is to say that these are named the same thing, meaning if you have a recipe that says you need to use brown malt, and it says, hey, you need to use 30% brown malt, well, if you use this one, you're definitely going to get a dark beer.
Way darker, for sure. As for styles that this is going to go in, yeah, I think like we kind of mentioned before, like putting it into some porters, or golly, even a stout.
Yeah.
But also like kind of a random one that comes to my mind that this would be amazing in would be a Kentucky Common.
I can see that. Get a little bit of that extra coffee-esque.
Yeah, like imagine this with like kind of like a sweet, chewy, like and then all that corn adjunct in there. Like this would be amazing.
Yeah, I'll throw in like a milk stout too, just because it's got that kind of coffee but not super aggressive quality to it.
Totally.
Cappuccino stout.
There we go.
Yeah. I mean, I would, go along to say that you could add it into any dark beer. And again, if you're going into like that 150, 125, 150 crystal malt range, adding this in instead would be a great option to it. Keep a little bit of the sweetness out, add some more complexity, or even that pale chocolate. This would be a great substitute to it to add some more complexity to your beer.
And I'll throw in the ring just at 2 or 3% if you want to kick up an amber, but without adding a lot of direct roast quality or even that kind of powdery chocolate quality you can get off of a pale chocolate. Maybe substitute this in. It will definitely redden your beer more aggressively than using like a dark crystal.
Well, I think that pretty much covers the video on side by side brown malts. Till next time.
Yeah, let us know what your homebrew store has for your brown malts. And then also check us out. Every Sunday we will be doing a live stream, and you should also follow our Instagram because we're posting unique content on that. Follow us on Facebook. We'll post Logan's personal address below if you just want to stop by his house and say hi.
Wait, what?
Cheers, guys. Yeah, viva la beer.